Hello and welcome to Chapters, A Life in Books. I'm Hannah McInnes. Each week I step inside an independent bookshop to meet one of the British Book Awards shortlisted authors and talk about the books that shaped them. In this episode we're joined by the truly exceptional storyteller Elif Shafak, a tireless champion of the power of books to build bridges and make sense of a troubled world. Her best-selling works have enchanted readers across the globe. Elif, welcome to Chapters. I can't tell you how delighted I am to have you, of all people, on this podcast, because it's a chance to delve into one of the most expansive literary minds and to hear about the authors and the books and the sort of treasure trove I know it will be of writers that have inspired you in your life. And talking about treasure troves, it is such a joy to be doing it in Nomad Books.
Absolutely.
I know somewhere you're very fond of.
Absolutely.
I think we both had this shoulder fall as we walked in here. You've been shortlisted for Author of the Year. Before we go back, I just want to hear what your reaction to that shortlisting is.
Well, may I first of all say it's such a pleasure for me to do this. And I really appreciate that you invited me. I love being in this lovely bookshop where I think the energy is so different, right? It's much calmer, embracing. I cherish that. I felt very happy and very honored when I learned that I was shortlisted. I think as a writer, our job is so much based on solitude. You know, you're on your own when you're working, when you're writing, without quite knowing if the story that you are producing is going to mean anything to anyone at all. And then when the book is out, when the story finds its readers, it has a life of its own. And when that story resonates with people, I think that means a lot for a writer. So I'm genuinely very touched and very honored.
Even after all these years of every book meeting such success and so much love for your work, do you still have that doubt every time a new book is coming into the world?
All the time I have doubt, self-doubt, anxiety, panic attacks, you know. And I think that what I learned over the years is that will always be there. So writing is interesting in that regard. You can never say, whether it's your first book or fifth or 10th book, you can never say, I got this, I cracked the code, you know, I have it, I got it now. There is no such thing. Always you will be going through valleys of anxiety, mountains of depression. Maybe one week you're going to feel like, oh, I have an amazing story, because you have to believe in the story. You have to believe that you are writing something meaningful. So you need that kind of faith. But maybe the next week you will be crawling on the floor because everything you've written the week before is so bad, and now you have to just chuck it aside, throw it aside. That is always the case.
Do you think that if you felt, oh, I've got this, and you didn't have the worries and the anxieties and the panic attacks, you'd almost be more worried that they weren't there, because without that, they're what keeps you going in a way?
Well, I've never experienced what it is like to write without anxiety, so I can't maybe comment on that. But what I have understood maybe better over the years is that you learn to accept this. This is part of the process. I think we writers, novelists in particular, we always suffer a little bit more maybe when we are writing, but at least for myself, I can speak. I feel a little bit miserable when I'm writing, but when I'm not writing, I feel more miserable. So that's part of the story. But on the other hand, you really, really love what you're doing. There's so much joy, so much love. And I think love is the key word here. If we love what we're doing, even when you're suffering and when you feel miserable, when you have your anxiety attacks, it's okay, because there's something deeper at its core. And that has to be love, always.
I mean, part of this being shortlisted as Author of the Year is recognising the fact that you were made the President of the Royal Society of Literature, I think just this year.
Yes.
I'm also really interested to hear from you what that role means, what you want to bring to it.
Well, I'm very, very touched, very honoured to become the new president of the Royal Society of Literature, which is one of our oldest institutions celebrating literature, literacy, libraries, you know, the art of storytelling. And I believe we live in a world in which so much is so broken, you know, a world of anxiety, anger, AI, the three A's that do not make our lives easy. We need literature, we need books, just like we need water, we need bread. It's an existential need. This is not some luxury that can be discarded, put aside in times of financial crisis or some political turbulence. We need it all the more, I think, at a time like this. The RSL, Royal Society of Literature, has so many hundreds of members, honorary members. There's a continuity over time, you know, more than 200 years of legacy. And I think our primary aim is to honor the works of every person who contributes to literature, you know, from poets, editors, novelists, writers. There is no such thing as hierarchies in our world, no such thing. We're all part of this circle. And so for me, what really is important is that sense of solidarity, that sense of community, which I believe is sorely needed today.
It's so interesting you say we need it more. Do you think sometimes society or perhaps people in charge forget that actually we need things like literature more as the world becomes more and more difficult to grapple with? They sort of sometimes sideline things like the arts and literature, and actually they should be at the centre of the discussion in the way that they can change things.
Indeed, and earlier we talked about how this world was the time of three A's, anger, anxiety and AI, but I always think if it were to become the time of four A's, it would become a much more difficult world. And what I mean by that is if apathy were added into the equation. Apathy is a very dangerous threshold. The moment we become numb to each other's sorrows, to each other's stories, the moment we stop caring, you know, about what's happening maybe in a different part of the world or just next door to my neighbor, because the local and the global, everything is connected. The moment we become desensitized and atomized. The reason why I mention this is because I genuinely believe literature is the antidote to numbness. It helps us to connect, it helps us to care. And there are so many fascinating studies that show as human beings, we are emotional creatures. What we remember through stories and through emotions. We forget numbers, we forget data. I mean, no one said it better than Maya Angelou. You know, she said, people might forget what you have said to them. They might even forget what you have done to them, but they will never ever forget how you made them feel. It is those feelings, the emotions, the stories that stay with us. So I think literature can do gently a lot of healing, quietly, both on a individual but also collective level. It breaks my heart when we don't recognize the role of bookshops, libraries, literary festivals, cultural institutions, when you shut down these beautiful hubs, you know, centers of collective energy. I think that has massive political consequences as well, in the sense that I think we become more divided in an already divided and polarized world.
I mean, you are preaching very much the converted, as you know, in that sense. But I love that. Literature is an antidote to numbness, is the thing I will take away, and maybe we should put it on T-shirts, quite frankly. It's so important. So talking about stories, let's go back to the very beginning or somewhere near the beginning. Can you remember your first bookish memory in your life?
I do actually remember those moments very vividly, mostly because I was an only child and I was a lonely child. I felt very lonely growing up. My parents got separated when I was very young. I was born in France and then I came to Turkey with my mother. And my mom was a single working mom. I was on my own for long stretches of time. I was also looked after by a very traditional spiritual grandmother who was a very, very kind person. She wasn't very well educated, only because she had been pulled out of school for being a girl, and she wholeheartedly believed in women's education. in grandma's house, and she was a bit of a matriarch in a very patriarchal world, there weren't too many books. There were a few books on the shelves, and I had read all of them, and I would reread them, trying to invent different endings for the existing books. But I don't know why, there were some Jules Verne books, and Jules Verne is actually a very interesting author for imagination, you know, science fiction. I think he really opens up so many doors. But frankly, what I remember from those earlier chapters of my own upbringing is oral storytelling. I think that left a big impact on me. So my grandmother was a storyteller. And she is the one who introduced me to the folk tales of the Balkans, Anatolia, Asia Minor, the Levant, the Middle East. And I still love that world very much. It's a very different kind of storytelling, much more cyclical, like circles within circles. So even though I love the Western canon, particularly the novel as a genre, that is not the only tradition that I feel attached to. There's another tradition out there, and I've never lost touch with that.
I was just thinking now, which author was it? Which beautiful book was I lost in where that was very much central theme? And then I remembered it's definitely yours right behind you, because that's a huge part, of course, of There Are Rivers in the Sky, the like beauty of oral storytelling. Do you have a favourite that stands out, a favourite book from when you were younger, or a favourite story perhaps that wasn't written down?
I mean, I think I can tell you that Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, it was like a turning point for me. And it was an emotional summer because I spent that summer, this is when they were officially separating, my parents. I spent that summer, half of it with my paternal grandmother in Smyrna, Izmir, and I spent half of the summer in Ankara with my maternal grandmother. And in between, as I was commuting, I read A Tale of Two Cities. It was an interesting summer, a bit heavy for me emotionally because these two women were very different at first glance. They're both Turkish, middle class, same background, same religion. But their interpretation of the world and maybe faith couldn't have been more different. My paternal grandmother's understanding was much more based on fear, whereas my maternal grandmother's was based on love. So as I was contrasting these two women or lifestyles, these two cities, Charles Dickens kept me company. It really, really changed me.
Gosh, amazing. I wonder if it was Dickens or who it might have been that you read and thought, this is what I'd like to do. Writing is something for me. Or perhaps it wasn't a book that made you think that. It was a love of, again, this oral storytelling tradition. When was it that you started to think that you could be or wanted to be a writer?
Well, I think the need for stories, the need for books came to me early on, but that's not because I wanted to become a writer, a novelist someday. I didn't know such a thing was possible. There were no such role models around me. I just needed books. I needed that companionship. But over time, as I kept reading and reading, I realized I could tell stories, perhaps. And I remember there was this moment in Spain, so from my maternal grandmother's maybe house, you know, very traditional lifestyle, I was zoomed into Madrid to an international school where I had to learn Spanish first and then English. And I was a very introverted child. I couldn't keep up with my classmates. So once again, books became my sanctuary. And I suddenly, when you start learning a new language and then a third language, I suddenly discovered a whole new literature, Spanish literature, and then English literature. And one book that really, really changed me, and I've read many times over the years, and I'm still rereading today, is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. It really changed me. Of course, I read a children's edition. This was a shorter version. But I think what I loved about Don Quixote was not only the story, but also the craftsmanship. You know, the story was amazing, this delusional knight, Don Quixote himself in La Mancha with Sancho Panza. They were just brilliant. They were my friends. But beyond that, how do you write a novel? I think for every novelist, Don Quixote is a gem, is a jewel, and it's very, very close to my heart.
Do you remember when you did believe? You said it was very hard to imagine you could be a writer because there were no role models. Do you remember when you thought, actually, I can do this, I will do this?
I do, because that came to me a bit later on, around the time I was 17, 18 years old. At the time, I was reading very intensely Russian literature. In my early years at university and high school, later years, I just became infatuated with Russian literature. So I was delving into the world of Tolstoy, Gogol, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, of course, and then you discover people like Anna Akhmatova, and I loved it. There was so much also in common, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, and then the Russian Empire. There are some echoes, but also the questions that were shared in those novels were very universal, timeless, in my opinion. Around those days, I think I realized this is what I want to do all my life. But of course, it was impossible to imagine that you could make a living by just writing stories. So I always thought that I need to have a second job. So academia felt like the right place for me. If I stay in academia, earn enough, will I have the time and the intellectual maybe pool that I need? Because I love learning. I love learning from multiple disciplines. Can I write my stories? Fiction was always what I wanted to do. And the novel, I think, is where my heart beats. So even though I'm interested in books in general, fiction is for me the center.
Are those Russian writers and those stories still the things that inform your writing today in many ways?
Not as much as back then, but I think they did leave an impact on me. The questions they ask about morality, mortality, love, family, history, faith, but also doubt. I think many of those questions are questions that I also like to deal with.
Yeah. So some of our questions in chapters are hypothetical, and I want to know if a friend arrived at your door and said that they had never, for some reason, read a book in their life so far. They live in a country where books have been banned and they've managed to escape, and they've come to you first because obviously you would go to Elif Shafak first if you could. And they say, what is the first book that I should read? What would you tell them?
Oh, that's a tough question. Where do you begin? I mean, I might choose something calm and sentimental. So there's this Swedish author, Tove Jansson, The Summer Book. It's a concise, sentimental, but in a very calm way. There's so much wisdom in it and humor as well. So it's this relationship between a 6-year-old small girl and her grandmother and their dialogues. There's also a lot of appreciation for nature. Nothing is insignificant, nothing is small. So I might start with The Summer Book. I think it's a wonderful introduction to world literature.
Okay, I'm noting that one down because I haven't read that one yet. Good recommendation. We talked a lot in this discussion already about a difficult world. You talked about the 3 A's. I think many of us would love to escape into a literary land of our choice. So I'm giving you the possibility to do that. Where are you going to go? Maybe you have to come back, I'm afraid. We need you here, but you've got a day or so just to forget about everything else there.
I love the question. Maybe a little footnote I might add, if I may, is that sometimes in the English language we use the word fiction as if it were the opposite of fact, right? And of course, based on that, very understandably, we think, or we want to think, especially when the world is so heavy, that fiction can give us an escape. I understand that. But at the same time, I also believe that fiction brings us closer to truth. It is not the opposite of facts or not the opposite of truth. So based on that, I would look for a literary world, if it makes sense.
Yes.
And I'm very interested in the 19th century. I love 19th century novelists and poets and philosophers. I think in many ways we are still living with the repercussions of the 19th century. The past is not bygone. It's not a bygone affair, it's not a closed door. It is still here, breathing, alive. And when we don't know the past, it's not like we just move on forward. Just the opposite. I think when we don't remember, we cannot repair. And what we don't repair will keep coming back again and again. It's an illusion to think that history is linear, a progressive, steady march. We want to think that way. We want to think that the arc of history bends towards justice. But these are all metaphors and they're all in our heads. I think when you follow the journey of a river, of a tree, of nature, or when you listen to folk tales, it's actually much more cyclical. Story time is based on circles. So I am giving you maybe a long answer, but I would love to maybe go and then come back, see the 19th century in different continents, America, Europe, and Russia, because it's a fascinating time. And we're still living with those consequences.
And are there any particular works of literature written in those times that kind of create and portray that world?
I struggle maybe to reduce it to one single person because it's
sort of impossible.
It is all connected. And I think the philosophical questions that were raised during that time, political science during that time, because questions about nation states, nationalism, identity. I mean, imagine this is a time when empires are coming to an end. So many empires are dying one after another. Nationalism is gaining momentum. We're still living with those ramifications. And most important questions about religion, nationalism, ideologies, socialism. So I think it's a fascinating time of ideas, high energy. But at the same time, very, very turbulent and can be violent too. And then you have novelists and poets trying to make sense of this chaos. That's something that I find very crucial.
Well, it might be one of those novelists, 19th century novelists, that you choose in the answer to another hypothetical question in the series, which is if you could have a coffee and sit down and have a conversation with any author. They can be alive, they don't need to be. Who would that be?
Well, in that case, I might jump forward a little bit in time, if that's okay, because I always thought that I wish.
There's something you've given thought to already.
I have because I wish I could have met James Baldwin, and I say this because. Of course, when he left America, I mean, he dealt with so much racism, homophobia, and so much more. He came to Paris, but then he came to Istanbul. That's why this is something that I thought about.
Yeah.
He lived in Istanbul, and interestingly, he felt very free in Istanbul. There's an interesting dialogue between him and one of our biggest novelists called Yaşar Kemal. James Baldwin tells him, I feel so free in Turkey. And our author says to him, well, that's because you're a foreigner in this country. I understand, the foreigner's gaze, because from his point of view, the same country is not as free. But what I'm trying to say is Baldwin, for me, is a fascinating mind, a fascinating public intellectual. I have a lot of respect for him, and the questions that he dealt with are, I believe, very much relevant today.
What would you have wanted to discuss with him?
I would have loved to listen to him. I mean, the way he uses, because he comes from this, of course, the tradition of the church, the sermons, the gospels, his use of metaphors, the cadence of his, I love listening to the rhythm, because there are videos, there are interviews of James Baldwin out there that anyone can listen to. In addition to reading his work on page, I love to listen to his voice. So I don't think I would like to discuss anything with him. I would just love to listen to him.
Yes, you just don't interrupt James Baldwin.
Let him talk.
Let him talk.
Yeah.
You quite rightly said that you shouldn't sort of associate the idea of fiction with an escape. It's close to the truth in so many ways, closer to the truth than most things often. But a slightly different question would be In Troubled Times, a book that's a balm, just a book that you would recommend. I think people don't necessarily need to escape at the moment, but everyone would love to perhaps have a book that they can dive into and just soothe themselves with. And I wonder if you have a recommendation for people on that front.
A beautiful question. I think any book of poetry, because really poetry is the balm. And what I love about poetry is just it it travels with us across borders and boundaries of time and geography. I think Walt Whitman, maybe a collection by Walt Whitman would be definitely a balm for the soul. Maybe a collection by Rumi might be a very different from a different part of the world and different era. But Rumi and Walt Whitman would be my recommendations.
I think that's very wise, because poetry, it probably is the most consoling in many ways, and sort of makes you feel better, even if it's desperately sad. There's still some sort of balm that it gives you. Another slightly hypothetical, strange query about a character that you have most fallen in love with in a book.
Oh, these are hard questions.
They
I mean,
are.
I did fall in love with Don Quixote as a child, but
Since him.
since him, I think, like many people, Elizabeth Bennet, of course.
Why?
Because she speaks her mind. She's headstrong at a time when, it's not only about patriarchy, but there isn't much room for women, for individual pursuits. She does that. She's a thinker, she questions, but she also follows her heart. So the intellect, the match of the intellect and the heart in her story, I think, has always spoken to me. And I think she's a brilliant character.
So is there a character in a book then, instead of loving, that you feel you've related to particularly?
Really, maybe the reason why I'm struggling is because you don't have to completely identify with a character. And I think, particularly as novelists, this is an exercise that we have to repeat over and over. Even a character that doesn't seem very nice, can I find the human element in that person? I've never believed in heroes, like absolute heroes.
Yeah.
I don't think there's such a thing as absolute good or absolute bad. Most human beings, at least, are on a spectrum in between. So as a novelist, what I am interested in is that moment in which maybe someone who's very courageous suddenly shows sign of fear, or the opposite, someone who's very timid all their lives suddenly becomes very brave. Why is that? How does that change happen? And it can happen to anyone. Those are the bits that I'm interested in, not the visible surface, but what is underneath the surface.
Do you have to empathize? I mean, you say it's not about being liked or disliked. Do you have to, though, as the author, find some empathy with all your characters, even if they're doing appalling things? Do you have to find some sort of empathy with them, some connection to why they would be driven to do the things they do?
Definitely. I mean, this doesn't mean approving, but I don't think writers are there to judge their characters. We're not above our characters. So what I'm trying to do is to try to understand. And earlier we talked about Russian literature. For instance, when you read Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment, it's not about, especially in a book like Crime and Punishment, it's not about approving, of course, what these characters are doing, but to try to understand why does this happen, to try to understand the human being in all its complexity, in all its rawness, sincerity. That is why we need literature, because these are the conversations that we cannot have easily in daily life otherwise.
We're going to bring it back to the British Book Awards.
Yes.
And I'm going to make you a judge of a category you can choose. You need to give a book award to whoever you like. This person does have to be alive.
Oh gosh.
You can choose the category. I know, I didn't say it would be easy.
This is so hard.
And don't worry, this is, it's not a real award. Well, we might make it into one, but the Elif Shafak Award for...
I don't know, and really, all respect to the judges. I have judged prizes over the years. It's a very tough job, really.
Is there something at the moment that you just feel as like particularly worthy of praise?
I mean, I had the honor of writing the introduction to Penelope Lively's Moon Tiger. It is, and I read it again after many years. What an amazing book that is. And I would maybe, yes, I would love to And we must talk about debut novelists and how difficult it is for young authors. And I genuinely believe there needs to be awards and support mechanisms for younger authors, but also for authors who might be, in older age and who might have produced perhaps many books. They need support as well. That's the thing about literature. It really does not get easier as you get older. So perhaps, if I may, at least show my respect for her.
Listening to you talk about the sort of struggle that continues through a writer's life, and particularly the struggle of being a debut novelist and how we must support them, it just makes me wonder whether you can think of the time when you suddenly or slowly, gradually realised that actually you no longer were that debut novelist trying to break into the world, that you had achieved success and were a successful and renowned and respected author.
I really appreciate your words, but I want to question that word, success. What exactly does it mean? When do we become successful? Is it when we sell this many copies, or when we get an award, or when we reach a state of mind in which there's no room for doubt or anxiety anymore, and we think we have achieved? What exactly is success? I think it's not a word that I associate with myself, and as writers I always observe this. I believe we are a walking mess in our daily lives. We're always full of anxieties and worries. As novelists, maybe there's this danger that we might have inflated egos because we think we're semi-gods when we are creating characters. But then when we go out into daily life and then we make lots of mistakes. So every human being is so complicated. One might look or seem to be successful in one area, but then in another area they might be a big failure. That complexity is something that I try never to lose sight of. The one thing that I know is, however, when I'm writing, I change in the sense that it's almost like I use a different part of my brain. When I'm writing, I feel like I am tapping into something that is much older than me, definitely wiser than me, bigger than me, of course more important than me, and that is the art of storytelling. It is ancient, it is universal, it doesn't belong to a single religion, region, class or ethnicity. It really belongs to all humankind. So then you stop worrying, you stop perhaps carrying your own little ego with you, and you let the flow of the art of storytelling be your guide. I think that's where we find wisdom. That's where we find wholeness and oneness. And then when you are not writing, you're back to your usual, failure or anxious self.
And you really can sense from reading your books that that's what you are doing, tapping into something bigger and wiser because of the places you take us and the people that tell your stories for you, your voices, your characters, your trees. You're in that process at the moment, or just emerging from it, are you?
I am. I have been in that world, in that deep water for a long time, and now I'm surfacing a little. I've been working on the new novel.
Can you tell us anything about that deep water that you're in?
I always struggle, when I'm writing. I don't quite know what I'm doing until I know, right? I think there are two different ways of writing novels. One is a bit more like engineering, a bit more mathematical, cerebral. I know amazing authors who write that way, authors who know exactly what they're doing or how the story is going to end, and how each and every character is going to behave. I respect that, but it's not my way. I like the second way, in which you're a little bit drunk. You don't quite know what you're doing, but you have a strong intuition, and you follow that intuition, and you take risks as a storyteller. That's why for a long time I don't quite know how to talk about my work in progress.
Because you've been a little bit drunk for how many years?
For a while. But now I can tell you that I have been very interested in this question about creativity in a time of chaos. What does literature mean when the world is so broken at a time of war, violence, suffering, and great sorrows? Does fiction even mean anything? And that was my starting point. That question brought me to a writer who I respect a lot, who dedicated his whole life to literature. And I wanted to understand how he did it, because I felt very lost myself. And then as I delved into his story, I realized he lived in a time of war and violence and immense turbulence. And that author is Gustave Flaubert, who is the author of Madame Bovary. So in this book, I am delving into Madame Bovary, and I am writing about Gustave Flaubert, and I am writing about a time of turbulence, destruction, and division. But in an interesting way, I want women to tell the story. So these are women from completely different backgrounds, turning it upside down. Instead of a male author telling the story of a woman, it will be the other way around, women telling his story.
Oh my goodness. I'm sitting here praying with all my heart that the powers that be let us keep that wonderful thing in the podcast, because we've just heard in this magical bookshop about that. Sounds wonderful, and obviously the world does not that's the first time maybe you've articulated it. I don't know. You're obviously incredibly busy writing, doing a number of other things. I don't know how much time you have to actually read yourself at the moment, but if you do get a moment, what are you reading?
You know, when I'm in the middle of a novel, I try not to read many novels, but I read poetry a lot. I love that. And these days I am reading and rereading some of the poems of a Persian Iranian poet, female poet called Furukhzad. She's not very well known in the West, but I'm hoping that will change. She's a remarkable mind, remarkable woman who talked about female sexuality, desire, issues that were not easy to talk about in an extremely patriarchal society at a very early time, and unfortunately paid a very heavy price for that. So I would love more people to discover her work.
What happened to her?
Well, she suffered a lot in her private life. Her son was taken away from her. Many people called her horrible names because of her writing, the themes that she dared to deal with in her poetry. So it's when you read about her life, there's a lot of suffering there. Just like Anna Akhmatova pays the price, Furukhzad also pays the price for being a female poet at a very difficult time in a very enclosed society. But I think through her art, she just transcends those borders. I would love us to read her more widely.
Well, now people can listen and hopefully go away and find her work. Where do you read when you're doing your reading?
Where do I read? I mean, anywhere, everywhere, isn't it? I love reading in cafes. I don't like silence much. I don't operate very well in quiet, neat and very orderly spaces. I panic a little bit. So I like sounds of the city, actually.
Yeah.
So in a cafe, I can work well. I put on my headphones. I listen to heavy metal. And then on repeat, the same song. That's how I write. When I'm reading, I'm either at home, sometimes walking I read, outside I read. I take different sized books with me on the tube.
I now remember you put your headphones on when you're writing and you write to heavy metal.
I do.
Always.
Always.
Which heavy metal?
Oh, I've always been a metalhead since my, youth. That never abandoned me. In middle age, it didn't abandon me. But what changed is I moved on to subgenres of heavy metal. So I like industrial, symphonic metal, metalcore, melodic death metal, more Viking, Scandinavian heavy metal.
So when you're writing, you are basically drunk listening to heavy metal.
That is so true.
That is brilliant. Not exactly the first thing people might think of you.
No, but that's about right. That's, I can listen to the same song on repeat maybe 80 times, 90 times, and then it becomes a loop of energy, and then I zoom in, zoom out, and I'm in a different place.
Wonderful. I think someone needs to make the documentary and try and recreate that idea. Do you know, I haven't asked you this will be my last question, because it's, in fact, we had Ruth Jones on the podcast, and for this answer, she chose your book.
Oh, I'm so happy and honored to hear that.
And
I love her. She's amazing.
She chose The Island of Missing Trees for the book that had most changed the way she thought about the world. And I said to her, I thought that that would mean a lot to you, because I know, and we've heard about it in this interview, that one of the central things that drives you is the power of literature to change minds and soften hearts. So I was delighted that she said that.
I am so delighted, really, so thrilled. And
Which
I have
is
so much
yours?
respect for her. Oh, which is mine? I might choose actually the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
It really changed me in so many ways as I was working on There Are Rivers in the Sky. I read the Epic of Gilgamesh properly. You know, I had a very maybe superficial knowledge about the epic, but no further than that. And it made me realize in so many ways this is a story. Imagine this, we're talking about one of the oldest pieces of literature known in human history, more than 4,000 years old. And we need to bear in mind that before it was written down on clay tablets by scribes, cuneiform, it was narrated by grandmothers to grandchildren for centuries via oral storytelling. That means it's actually much, much older than we know. And so I think it is a story that is so timeless, so universal. It doesn't have a typical hero at its center. If anything, Gilgamesh is an anti-hero. And it is a story in which the hero doesn't achieve anything. He fails in almost everything, you know. And it's only via journeys, friendship, loss, defeats, and he comes back at the end of the epic, and he's a changed person, a calmer person. But I also like to mention the Epic of Gilgamesh for a different reason, not only because of its subjects and, you know, the themes that it deals with and how universal that is, but also in addition to that, I like to think that ever since this epic was told and then written down, so many empires have come and gone. Yeah. So many strong men, you know, have perished, and even the tallest architectural structures have crumbled to dust. But a poem made of words, a poem made of breath, has survived. It has survived the tides of history, the turbulence of history, and here we are in this lovely bookshop 4,000 years later talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. So to me, it shows that literature has a very quiet, gentle, but profound power and resilience to transcend borders of time, to transcend borders of geography, and to quietly change minds and touch hearts. So I think I will always choose Epic of Gilgamesh for that reason.
I mean, I would quite happily stay in this bookshop talking to you for many, many more hours, but sadly that is not possible for many reasons. I said at the beginning, I thought we have a treasure trove. I think that that is really much too small. It's been like a cave of wonders. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a delight, really, for me. Thank you. Appreciate it.